Hey guys, Grace and I are making this video to teach you about decimal notation. We're going to do a Miss Bachach's dining room table lesson to review everything we've learned about decimal notation so far. Let's start over here. Base 10 blocks. Remember when we made the connection to base 10 blocks? We used to think about a flat as representing 100 pieces, but now we're going to have it represent one whole. Therefore, we also need to think about our rod. That's going to be 1/10. And our unit is going to be 1/100th. For example, I would take this fraction 47/100ths and represent it like this. 4/10, 7/100ths. I would take 1 23/100ths, representing it with a flat, 2 rods, and 3 units. 1 whole, 2/10, and 3/100ths. Let's talk about your favorite thing, money. We're thinking about decimals and fraction. A dollar can represent 1 whole. A dime can represent 1/10. And a penny can represent 1/100th. If we think about our original example, 47/100ths, it would look like this if it were represented with money. 4 dimes, 7 pennies, 47/100ths. 1 23/100ths would look like this. A dollar, 2 dimes, and 3 pennies. 1 23/100ths. Next, we started shading in hundreds charts to help us understand what these fractions actually looked like. So right now this one's blank. This would represent nothing, 0. If I shade in 1 unit, that represents 1/100th. If I shade in a full rod or 10 units, that would be 10/100ths or 1/10. If I shade in the entire chart, the whole thing, that's 100/100ths, 10/10ths, or 1 whole. For example, 47/100ths would be shaded in to look like this. You can see the 4/10ths and then the 7/100ths. 1 whole and 23/100ths would look like this. At this point, I want us to transition into using decimals. Now for this, I'm going to pull out our old place value chart from the beginning of the year, but I added some new place values in here. We still have our hundreds, our tens, and our ones, but then we have this decimal point. It's kind of like a fraction bar. It represents that we're going to use amounts that are less than 1. Whenever you see a decimal, you say and. You have tenths and hundredths. Now this would be the same thing as what we just talked about, tenths and hundredths. Let's say I had 64/100ths. I would put this on my place value chart by first figuring out what is in my ones place. I don't have any whole numbers, so I'm going to put 0. Now I think about what's in my tenths place. I have 64/100ths, so I actually have 6/10ths and 4/100ths. So 64/100ths would look like this. In our example, 47/100ths will be written like this in decimal notation. Notice my 0 in the ones place because I don't have any whole numbers. 4/10ths, 7/100ths. My decimal point represents that the 47/100ths are less than 1. 1 whole and 23/100ths would be written like this. You see, I actually have a 1 in my ones place at this point. Next, we'll talk about our number line. I've already written all of our benchmark fractions on here for you. You see 2/10, 9/10. But here are also the corresponding decimals that go with them. As you can see, 2/10 is equivalent to 2/10. They're the same number, just written differently. Let's say I was trying to find 8/10 on my number line. I see 8/10 right here. And I would mark it on the number line like this. Let's say I was trying to find 35/100ths. Well, I'm going to look over here. I have 3/10 and 4/10. 35/100 is going to be right in the middle. So I'll put my dot right here. This is how we mark decimals on our number line. If I want to locate 47/100 on my number line, what I do is I look for my 4/10 and 5/10 and find about in the middle. You see how 47/100 is a little bit closer to 5/10. If I want to find 1 whole and 23/100, first I look for 1 whole, then I find 1 whole and 2/10, and then I can easily mark 1 whole and 23/100. Working with fractions and decimals can sometimes be kind of confusing. 5/10 looks like this as a decimal. This would be 5 rods, but a number like 5/100 would be written like this as a decimal. You could represent it with 5 units. These are not the same number. Notice the tenths and the hundredths. You cannot forget to include that 0 in your tenths place. When you need to write a number in decimal notation, don't forget, first write the number as a fraction, then you can easily convert it to be a decimal. I hope this video was helpful. Please feel free to come back and view it anytime you need help with fractions or decimal notation.